All right, just a few quick words here about the midterm. I've given some information there on Blackboard. I'll just elaborate a little. As you can see, there'll be 19 questions, and you'll have 90 minutes. That's hopefully quite sufficient, but hopefully it'll go all right. Just be sure, you're in a good place, and make sure there's no reason to expect your internet to crash or anything during those 90 minutes. We'll try to avoid that. So basically, 15 of the questions are multiple choice or true-false kind of questions. That's basically just like the other quizzes, right? Now this one's on the material from week 5, chapters 4 and 5. There's 15 questions rather than 10, but they're the same kinds of questions, so you can prepare in just the same way as you did before. It covers basically everything there. That shouldn't be too bad, I hope. The other 4 questions then, 3 of them are written questions, 3 of them are so-called short answers. I don't know, there's a limit on Blackboard about how much you can write, but anyway, you don't need to write a whole lot, but they're the kinds of questions that, are pretty direct. There's a pretty kind of, clear way to go about them, basically. It's in terms of, explaining something or explaining a difference between things or whatever. So here, have in mind, in terms of preparing, thinking about stuff that we had earlier on, about general moral theories, utilitarianism, or Kantian ethics, the main ideas there, the main difference between them, that kind of thing. How those perspectives relate to autonomy, for example, how autonomy is really central to a Kantian view, right? When you're focused on duty in a categorically imperative way, autonomy is really strongly upheld, whereas in a utilitarian view, of course, just like anything else, the value of it is, well, it's kind of up for grabs. If it leads to overall good outcomes, then fine. But in principle, it's something that can always be sacrificed, or any individual's autonomy can always be sacrificed for some greater good. Other things, think about basically just the principles of beneficence and non-maleficence. Just think about what those mean, the difference between them. It's good to be clear about that. Maybe think of some examples that can help clarify that. And then basically material from the informed consent chapter, basically. So in particular, do spend time both on the Faden and Beauchamp article and the Katz article, basically. So the first, the Faden and Beauchamp, that's the one with the 2 senses, sense 1, sense 2, of informed consent. That's basically just the idea, well, on the one hand, kind of like the deeper, truer moral meaning, what informed consent really means from an individual patient's perspective, say, versus the second sense is more kind of the institutional form that it takes. In a sense, it's informed consent in the real world, you might say, how it's actually put into practice and so on. Why it's important, right? Why it's significant to get clear about that distinction is because we do want to know, or be able to assess whether in some social or institutional context, whether the framework of informed consent is indeed working properly, whether it really does measure up morally. And it's the first sense that provides kind of the standard, or is kind of the touchstone. It's the reference point to be able to make such judgments about it. So as the Katz goes, Katz is the fairy tale guy, right? He's the one that wondering, at least at the time of writing, whether informed consent was kind of a fairy tale or a mirage or a charade or whatever. In a way, he's got an idea of 2 senses as well, but he doesn't quite separate them out as much as Faden and Beauchamp do. And there is a certain point of contention between them, where Katz is thinking that informed consent is a matter of joint decision-making between patient and doctor, say, whereas Faden and Beauchamp are always saying, that's not essential to it. It might look like that, maybe not. That's not a huge point necessarily, but it is something just to have in mind. But when Katz then is thinking about it being a fairy tale, he's thinking, well, the decision-making that's going on isn't really joint in the way that it should be. So that's the way there's like 2 senses being compared, but he's just basically arguing that, it's not really living up to what it's supposed to be And the idea is he presents different things about that, as you'll see. Things, a big one, the biggest one, in fact, in his mind has to do with just the uncertainty, the state of uncertainty in medical knowledge, medical science. Makes a very interesting point that it's not so much despite advances in medical science and technology, but it really just goes together with that the level of uncertainty goes up. There just are more possibilities. There's just more variables. There's more things to consider when it comes to different possible courses of action. So it just becomes all the more important that decision making be joint. But he does think there's just a deep-seated tendency toward paternalism in the medical profession, and it really just needs to get over that and just recognize that it's in a situation of uncertainty, and really the only way to get out of that is to make decision-making more truly a joint affair involving the patient, who, of course, knows, her values and perspectives on these things. So go over that. Spend some time, be sure, on those articles and all the rest of it before you get into it. If you have any questions ahead of time, just let me know. But otherwise, good luck. I'm sure it'll go fine. And looking forward to the second half of the semester.